And there was one man who had a great voice, a most beautiful voice, and he had memorized the story. His hour. He had memorized the complete word perfect. It had taken him 6 months. And well, but he had spent hours and hours and hours memorizing every word. And the really funny thing was, he was telling the story, everybody, with the exception of 1 or 2, including me, because I was doing my middle point at the back, but everyone nodded off. And he looked up and he just said, okay, one more person falls asleep and I'm out of here. And everyone started, not asleep. But it became clear that he wasn't in the story. He was simply providing a feat of memory. He was simply, it was like listening to a tape recorder, whereas all the other storytellers were seeing the story in their mind and telling the audience what they had seen. And that was when it really dawned on me that you really do have to be in the story. It isn't a feat of memory. You can't be sort of thinking in your mind again at the bottom of the page and turning the page and what's going on. It was, you had to know the story. So we told the Odyssey, we told the Iliad. The Iliad took another day. And then last year it was interesting because, it was 2 years ago, I was part of a group out of New York that told the Monkey King, which is a Chinese tale, The Voyage of the Monkey King, and it's a Buddhist story. And with language that I was totally unfamiliar with, and it was nice working in the library. I had a Chinese admin assistant, so she was able to give me the correct pronunciation for the various characters that I had. Of course, I get there and everyone using the same characters has a completely different pronunciation, which made it a bit challenging for the story. But it was amazing to see how a story grows and how an audience gets involved and really does come back each day to hear more and more of the stories unfold. So it's been a real treat to tell stories that have rich history. But as Mary Ellen was talking a bit about her story, I'll share a bit of mine, because as much as telling stories from the past, it's also fun to tell stories of your own. And I used to talk about where I grew up, and it's just that Rick Fizek, who's here, also grew up on the same street, so he knows this isn't true. But when I would talk about this, where I lived, where I grew up, as Carmen, people would often think that I spoke with such love and affection that I had this great house, Carnwood, in my past. A great manor house. Let's face it, Setterington is a grand-sounding English name. And the Setterington family home, Carnwood. Well, Elizabeth has Balmoral, and Blanche had Belle Reeve, and, Scarlett had Tara, and Ken had Carnwood. But Carnwood is a street in Scarborough. It's only 3 blocks long. And the houses are far, far from grand. Little story and a half houses, some bungalows. But it was there that I met the heroes of my youth. Those were the people that inspired me. And invariably, they were the women of Scarborough, the women who were on Carmen. And I just want to tell you about one of them. And I've seen all the great actresses on stage. I saw Katharine Hepburn in their last performance in Toronto. I was just in New York, and I saw Elaine Stritch in A Little Night Music and Bernadette Peters. I've seen many great actresses, but none of them have ever been as good as the actress that I knew on Carmen. She was the woman who lived across the street, Mert Gibbs. Now, I have to tell you, in our house, there was never any swearing. There was absolutely, profanity had no place in our house. And as a small child, I remember my mother. She had a rhyme from her childhood. Naughty little slang words. Bother, hang, and blow. Lead us down to worse words. Take us down below. So if you think about it as bother, hang, and blow as being swear words, you can imagine in our house there was no swearing at all. I remember once my mother reaching for a metal recipe box on the top shelf of the cupboard, dropped it, and it landed on her bare foot on her toe. And my mother said, "Pause." My father was incensed. Gutter language. We can't have that in the house. And my poor mother was hobbling on one foot, but there was never to be any kind of swearing. But Mert, who lived across the street, swore like you could not believe. And we used to love having her come over to our house. My sister and I would be sent outside to play because every word out of her mouth seemed to be swearing. She knew all the words. Like it wasn't just Dan and Al. She used the S word. She used the F word. She even used the C word. She used them, and she used them in combinations that we could not believe. My sister and I would be at the door listening in. It was such fun whenever Mert came over for a visit. And I remember one time when another woman down the street, Ethel, gave my mother Dutch licorice. Now, Scarborough back then, Dutch licorice was, like an exotic food. And we had never had it. And it's salty. My mother loved licorice. I loved licorice. It tasted, it was awful. I had it, I didn't like it, and my mother must have been thinking, oh, well, give the kids a treat. Let's walk across the street and give Mert a piece. So Mert's standing on the front porch. Well, she took a piece of this Dutch licorice and immediately spit it out into the bushes beside the veranda and said, "It tastes like shit." Well, my sister and I were doubled over. This was like the best. Every meal that we had after that, we didn't have to say anything. We just had to say, well, it tasted. My mother would say, "Stop." There was nothing. It was just such fun whenever Mert came over. We'd count the swear. We had great fun. And it was just, even as we grew up and moved away from Carnwood, we moved to a street called Purple Dust Trail. How bizarre is that? It's still Scarborough. And Mert would come over with her husband, and she brought her grandson one day. And I remember she still had the turn of phrase. The child was crying, and she turned to Howard and she said, "Give me the baby, you old fart. Can't you see it's got the shits?" Well, of course, we were killing ourselves laughing at that. And it was just that Mert was always great fun. And it wasn't until I grew a little bit older, I had moved away from home, I was involved in a relationship that it was the first time in my life that I knew that my life wasn't my own. I was thinking about somebody else more than I was thinking about myself and the demands that were on me, and whether or not this was actually the best thing for me, because I was probably more involved than he was. It was difficult, it was tense. And at the same time, I discovered that my father was dying. And so my sister and I both went home. And we were at the house, and every day there would be a trip to the hospital to see my father, who was dying of lung cancer. The hospital was just across the street. It was a tough time. And we'd come home, and the phone would ring, and invariably, Mert would call. And Mert would cry on the phone. She was wailing. She thought my father was a marvelous man, and it was so hard because we'd be back from the hospital. It was tough on my mother, and then she'd get on the phone with Mert, and Mert would just sob on the phone. My mother said, "Forget it. Mert is not going to the hospital. It's just too hard. It's going to be too hard on your father. Mert can't go to the hospital." And so there was discussion, and it was just that I was home alone one day when Mert called. And she said, "Ken, I'm telling you, I'm going to visit your father tomorrow, and I know that he likes Devon cream, and I know he likes my strawberry jam." So I made jam. It was in the summer, and Marks and Spencer's had just come to Scarborough, and they had Devon cream in little jars. The next day, we went to the hospital. Mert and Howard came in, and Howard was a butcher who had lost a few fingers through various accidents, I guess, at work. And Mert was a big woman. And Mert and Howard came in, and Howard talked about how Mert had been getting ready to come to the hospital and how she'd been putting on her girdle. And he did that old red skeleton routine where, you're behind and putting on your girdle from behind, but without fingers, it was even more fun. We watched this, and the two of them had us howling. It was so much fun. Joke after joke, I don't remember any of them. I just remember tears streaming down my face. I was laughing so hard. And Mert was just a riot. My father loved having she had made scones. She had the strawberry jam and the Devon cream. It was a real treat. I don't think my father ate very much, but he was so delighted that she got so much strawberry. And it was just that when we went to lunch, I walked out with her. She gave my father a kiss. My sister walked out with my mother stayed behind. And I was walking with Mert, walking out of the hospital room. She was a big woman. Her hand was over my shoulder. And it was just, she had put on such a show, and everything was gone. And as we got to the door of the hospital room, this woman just collapsed completely on top of me. She was sobbing her heart out. Her arms were around me, my arms were around her. I knew at that moment I had never loved anyone as much as I loved Mert Gibbs. I'd seen every actress that I never wanted to see, and I've seen them since. I have never seen anybody put up a performance that I saw Mert do that afternoon. And no matter what, Mert Gibbs will always be my very favorite actress. And the amazing thing in telling a personal story is I haven't told that story in a long time. But when I saw Rick, because he grew up in Carmen as well, the really funny thing is it's surprising how you can feel it for myself anyway. I enjoy remembering people and having stories that are created through that. And the funny thing was, my mother's soon to be 90, and I can't say her memory is as good as it once was, but the amazing thing is in talking with somebody, a senior, what is remembered? It's the stories. And so when we went out for dinner last night, and we were talking about Carnwood, and about all the different people that lived on Carnwood. Of course, my mother didn't remember what she had for lunch, but she could tell about all the different people that lived on that street. And it's the stories that stay with us. It's the stories of our youth, of our life, of things that matter. And I think that that's why stories are also so incredibly powerful and why people enjoy sharing and having the stories in their